We have a lot of ground to cover today. We have 3 chapters. So let me start by saying last week, if you were with us, we covered Genesis 28. And we need to sort of re-see Genesis 28 if we're going to see these 3 chapters, Genesis 29 through 31, if we're going to see these chapters rightly. So let's just sort of take a trip down memory lane to last week. If you remember, in Genesis chapter 27, Jacob stole his brother's blessing. This is a totally dysfunctional family. So you're about to do the Thanksgiving thing. If you are about to be around a dysfunctional family, it probably looks really normal compared to this one, all right? So in Genesis 27, Jacob steals his brother's blessing. Then Esau, he just sees red. He's like, the deed has to be done. Esau decides in that moment that when his dad dies, he is going to murder his brother Jacob. So in Genesis 28, Jacob is now on the run. He is 60 miles into a 500-mile journey to Haran, his mom's home. But as we learned last week, God goes after bad guys. He goes after bad guys like Jacob. And he goes after Jacob, this bad guy. Jacob's not a good guy in the story. He's a manipulator, he's a deceiver, he's a cheat. He is all of those things in this story, right? He's not a good guy, but God goes after this bad guy, and he does so through a dream. And we looked at Jacob's dream last week. The dream comes really in 2 parts. There are promises that kind of comprise the dream. God comes to Jacob with the same promises that he went to Jacob's grandpa with, Abraham, that he came to Jacob's dad, Isaac, with. It's the same promises. It's the promise of a people. It's a people that God promises him. He says, Jacob, you're going to be a great nation. He says, your descendants are going to be as numerous as the dust of the earth. That's a lot of descendants, right? That's descendants everywhere. So he's promising Jacob a people, and we know that from those people, a person will come. His name is Jesus, and he's going to be a blessing to all nations, right? So it's this promise of a people, and then God comes and promises Jacob a place for those people. Right? It's the land of promise, the promised land throughout the Old Testament. And we now know that that's actually the new heavens and the new earth. And then God comes to Jacob and promises him his presence. In Genesis chapter 28, verse 15, we read this. This is God to Jacob. Behold, Jacob, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and I'll bring you back to this land. Jacob, I will never leave you until I have done what I have promised to do. Just hear that one more time. This is God coming to a bad guy, right, Jacob? And he says, behold, Jacob, I'm with you. I will keep you wherever you go. I'll bring you back to this land. I'll never leave you until I've done what I've promised. This is God saying to Jacob, Jacob, I am with you and I will always be with you. It doesn't matter where you go. It doesn't matter what you do. Jacob, I will be there. Now, when God says, I am with you, you could translate that or hear it in this way. It's God saying, I am for you. I'm with you, I am for you. It's the same idea. This is God saying, Jacob, I'll always be with you. I will always be at work for you, Jacob. This is what God is promising him. He's looking at Jacob and saying, Jacob, there is no person, there's no evil, there's no tragedy, there's no sin done by you or against you, Jacob, that will stop my plans, my promises in your life. They are invincible, Jacob. So that's the promise. And then God comes with a picture. He sees in this dream a ladder. And on that ladder that's connecting earth to heaven, right? And on this ladder, it's this portal between heaven and earth. On this ladder, there are angels ascending and descending. And there at the top of the ladder is God. So now let's think about what the dream is showing here. The dream is showing God on his throne. And just see God on his throne in this dream. God is not up there on his throne asleep. That's not what we find God doing, right? No, in the dream, God is up on his throne and he is at work running the universe. He has this army of angels. He gives this angel a command, an assignment to do. That angel descends the ladder, he comes down to earth, he does the assignment, then he comes back up and he gets another command. He gets another assignment, and he descends the ladder, he does the thing, and then he comes back up and ascends again and gets another one. It's God running the universe. It's God at work in this world. It's a picture of his promise. The picture is showing Jacob, I'm always at work for you, Jacob. I am with you, Jacob. I am for you. And Jacob, there is no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you, Jacob, that will stop my plans, my promises from being accomplished. Nothing, Jacob. Do you see this? Jacob, I am with you. And me, the God who is with you, is always at work for you, Jacob. So Jacob, you don't have to manipulate to get your way. You don't have to cheat to get your way. You don't have to steal to get your way. No, Jacob, I am with you and always at work for you so you can trust my promises. Okay, now that's Genesis 28. And Genesis 28 leaves us with this question. Here's the question of Genesis 28. Will you trust God's promises? Jacob, will you trust me? Rodney, will you trust me? Will you trust my promises? Will you trust that God is always with you, always at work for you? Will you trust that promise? And God knows that trusting his promises are hard, so he's given us chapters 29 through 31 to help us. That's the purpose of Genesis 29 through 31. They are to help you believe his promises. If I were titling these three chapters, I would write over Genesis chapter 29. So these three chapters, I would write over them this title: God proves his promises. That's what he's doing in these three chapters. He is proving his promises. Genesis chapter 29 through 31 is a storied presentation of that beautiful promise of Romans 8:31. That if God is for us, who can be against us? These three chapters put that promise in story form. It is showing us that promise is true. If God is for us, who can be against us? God shows yet again in Genesis that his promises are invincible. Invincible. There's nothing that can stop the promises, the plans, the purposes of God in this world, nothing. And if you need help like I do in believing that, this passage is for you. So here's what I want to do today. I want to give you 4 ways that God proves his promises. 4 ways in this text that God shows his promise to be true. 4 ways. Here's the first. The first thing God does for Jacob, to prove to Jacob, you can trust me. Hey, what I said in Genesis 28, you can trust that I will do. Here's the first thing he does to prove his promise. God gives a people. God gives a people. Okay, so let's just, again, think back to Genesis chapter 28. God makes a promise to Jacob. Here's the promise. It's in Genesis 28, verse 14. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth. That's the promise. It's that promise for a people. But the promise has a problem. Here is the promise in Genesis chapter 29. Jacob has no wife. That's the problem. And with no wife, there will be no kids. And with no kids, there will be no nation. There will be no people as numerous as the dust of the earth. That's not going to happen without a wife. So the question is, what is God going to do? The lingering question is, will God provide a wife for Jacob? Will God provide for his promise? That's where we pick it up in verse 1 of Genesis 29. Then Jacob went on his journey. Now remember, he is on the run, right? He is on the run. He's fleeing for his life. His brother wants to kill him, but he is also fleeing for a wife. Isaac has sent him to go and find a wife, right? That's another reason that he has left his home and he finds himself on this journey. So Jacob went on his journey, and he came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large. And when all the flocks were gathered, the shepherds, so this stone was so big it took many shepherds, plural shepherds. The shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Verse 9 now. While he was still speaking with them, the shepherds, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. This would not be the last time that a guy looks at something and says, oh, I'm going to show her. I'm going to become the Incredible Hulk for her real quick. So the rest of you guys, I know this would normally take like 3 men to move the stone. Rachel, it's going to take 1 man to do it, right? That's what's happening here. And then you get to verse 11. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Now, part of what we're seeing when you read this text, it's like deja vu. It's a repeat of Genesis 24. Right, in Genesis 24, God had Rebekah at the well for Isaac, prepared a wife for Isaac, got her there at the well. Now, God has Rachel at the well for Jacob. And as we'll see, this is a messy marriage. It's going to get real messy, really, really fast. And with the marriage to Rachel, he's eventually going to marry her. And with the marriage, the text immediately shifts to Jacob's dysfunctional family. And it is dysfunctional. It is bad news all the way around, but it shifts to Jacob's dysfunctional yet growing family. Jacob, he gets a 2-for-1 deal in this text, right? Jacob marries 2 sisters, Leah and Rachel. I mean, what could go wrong? Except everything, right? And everything does go wrong in this text. But even in the mess of these marriages, Jacob has his first 12 children, 11 boys, 1 girl. And we're still waiting on Benjamin, the 12th boy, and those 12 boys will eventually become the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. And now, in just a few chapters into the future, those 12 tribes are going to be millions of people, as numerous as the dust of the earth. Now, what is the point of this text? The text is showing us God proves his promises. God will provide for his promises. It's showing us that you will never meet a problem that is too big for the promises of God. Friend, you will never meet a problem in your life that is too big for the promises of God. It's a reminder that no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you can stop God's promises, his plans, his purposes for you. So just think about your life right now. Where do problems in your life feel bigger than God's promises? Where do the problems in your life just feel invincible? We would look at our life and say, there's just no way God could do that, because that problem right here, it's too big for God to handle. It's too big for God to do. Where would you look at your life and say that? Chances are you've got someplace in your life where that is true for you. You're just looking at it right now and you're like, no, it just seems too big for the promises of God, for the purposes of God to overcome that thing right there. Friend, this passage is in the Bible to help you believe the promise. That there is no problem that the promises of God will meet, that it can't redeem, that it can't solve. There is no problem bigger than God's promises. God gives a people to Jacob. Here's the second thing he gives to Jacob. God gives pain to Jacob. He gives people, and then he gives pain to Jacob. Now, God has some things he wants to do through this man. He's got things he wants to do through Jacob. But first, God has to do some things in Jacob. Now, this is helping us see what is of first concern for God. And what is of first concern for God is character formation. That is most important to God. Before God wants to do a thing with you, he wants to do some things in you. He wants to make Jacob into a usable man, into a man who will trust God, into a man who will walk by faith and not by sight. And to form that sort of person, God introduces pain into the story. When I was about 20 years old, I came across this quote from A.W. Tozer. He said, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." I think there's a lot of truth in that statement. It is doubtful, he says, whether God can bless a man greatly, use a man greatly, until he has hurt him deeply. God brings deep disappointment into our lives because God wants to do that deep work of character formation. Because oftentimes there's nothing that can do that deep work of character formation apart from that deep disappointment, apart from that pain being introduced into our life. And this was true for Jacob. When Jacob makes it to Haran, he ironically meets himself, a cheater, a manipulator, a deceiver, and his name is Laban. So when he comes to Haran, a mirror is sort of in front of him, and he is seeing a picture, this person who looks so much like him. It's this man, Laban. Laban, like Jacob, is a bad guy. He's a sleazy guy. He's a greedy guy. Laban loves him some Laban. Laban just cannot see past his own life to the life of anyone else. This is Laban. Do you remember last week we applied the babysitter test to Jacob? Just an easy way to kind of test the decency of a human being. Would I let this person come over into my house and keep my kids? And in the last chapter, in Genesis 28, we're like, nope, not going to let Jacob do that. And in this chapter, in chapter 29, we're like, nope, Laban does not pass the babysitter test. He does not make it. Not only would Laban rob you blind if you let him into your house, by the time you finish dinner, he's just watching your kids, you're eating dinner. By the time you finish dinner, your kids are sold on Facebook somewhere. I mean, that's Laban. This guy is just not a good guy. Right? He is greedy, he is sleazy, he is a bad guy, but he is the bad guy God used to do that deep work of character formation in Jacob's life. Okay, now I want you just to reckon with that for a moment. Laban's a bad guy, but he is the bad guy God used to do this work, that work of deep character formation in Jacob's heart. So Genesis chapter 29 contains one of the craziest stories in the Bible. Okay, it starts with Jacob wanting to marry Rachel. And to marry Rachel, Jacob agrees to 7 years of work for Laban. Now, this was normal at the time. He's just paying the bridal price that would be normal to pay, right? If you remember back in Genesis 24, when Abraham's servant shows up to get Rebekah for Isaac, he gives camels and all sorts of choice gifts as the bride price, right? This was just normal, kind of a custom of the day. But when Jacob shows up, here's his problem. He has no wealth. So his payment is about to be his work. That's going to be the way he pays the bridal price. But we just, right from the get-go of the story, we begin to see, we get a glimpse of Laban's deceit, that sort of greedy bone that he has in him. Commentators are quick to point out that 7 years of work is probably about double what would be the normal bride price. And Laban's already looking just through the lens of greed. He is glad to squeeze out every last drop he can out of Jacob. I mean, just gonna wring Jacob out for everything he's worth. Wring Jacob, his future son-in-law, out. Right? This is Laban. He's just not a good guy. But then it goes from bad to worse. After 7 years, Jacob's like, all right, Laban, it's time. I want my wife. He says, give me my wife in verse 21 of Genesis 29. And so we pick it up in verse 22. And Laban is just so deceitful. He doesn't say, okay, I'll give you Rachel. It's time. Rather, he says this, Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob went into her. Verse 24, Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. Verse 25, and in the morning, this is Jacob now. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. That is a messed up story. Over the years, I've heard a lot of, those sort of first night marriage surprises. I've heard a lot of those stories over the years, but I've never heard of a guy waking up next to the wrong girl. I've not heard that marriage surprise. I mean, there are so many things wrong with this moment. There's the deceit of Laban. I mean, can you imagine if you're Jacob, this is your father-in-law. I mean, how does that relationship recover from that? I mean, you are down in a ditch when this happens relationally. Then there's the deceit of Leah. She's complicit in the crime. She is probably put on Rachel's wedding dress. I mean, she is in full Rachel character to pull this off, right? It's just, it is, everything is wrong on every level. And then this is why when Jacob sort of wakes up the next morning, he comes to Laban and says, "What have you done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Jacob just got Jacobed, right? That's what happened in this text. Jacob got Jacobed. Jacob's known the pleasure of deceit, but now he knows the pain of being deceived. Jacob's now in that painful place that his brother Esau was in, that he put his dad Isaac in, but that pain had purpose. This was God hurting a man deeply so he could use the man greatly. The pain had purpose. God put this man into the crucible of suffering because he was making a new man with new character, with deeper character. And now remember, what is the point of this passage? It is God proving his promises. In this passage, he is showing Jacob that there is no pain his promises cannot redeem. This is what he wants you to see. There is no pain in Jacob's life and in your life that his promises cannot redeem. He wants us to see that no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you can stop God's plans for you, his promises to you. Maybe we could look at it this way. Do you have a Laban in your life? You have a Laban? What's a Laban? A Laban is someone who is making your life miserable. A Laban is someone who is just taking you to the point of exhaustion. They are a difficult person. All things being equal, you would rather never see that person again. They treat you unfairly. They are bad to you. They're just a bad person doing a lot of bad things to you. Do you have a Laban in your life? If so, heed this warning from one commentator. He says, "Let us not be so fixated on getting rid of Laban that we fail to see what God's doing through Laban." Let us not be so fixated on getting rid of this Laban, getting him out of our life, that we fail to stop and ask God, what are you doing in my life through this difficult person? Maybe you should just ask that right now. I've got a Laban. God, Lord, what are you doing in my life by inserting him into it? This is much less about me and that Laban, and it's much more about what you want to accomplish through that Laban. So God, would you help me be still on the operating table as you do that work in me? As you insert that purpose into the pain? God, would you help me receive this from you? Stonegate, let's allow God to use pain for his purposes. To do that work of making us, as James says, perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. This text is in the Bible to help us see that there is no pain that his promises cannot redeem. Friend, God will use that Laban in your life. He will insert purpose into that pain in your life. So God has brought people. God has given pain to Jacob. Thirdly, God gives prosperity to Jacob. Prosperity. Look at think with me back to Genesis chapter 28 again. The previous chapter is going to paint that picture of Jacob it's going to show us a man who is desolate. It's going to show us a man who's not only in a desolate place, but he's just in utter darkness in his life. He has nothing. He's in the middle of nowhere. He's got no one around him. This is the picture painted for us in Genesis chapter 28 of Jacob. Our man has fallen on hard times. And our man who's fallen on hard times finally gets to Haran. It's the family reunion, right? It should go great now. He's back with family. But then Laban, family, does everything he can to enrich himself and impoverish Jacob. That's what Laban is doing in his life. Jacob got to Haran without a penny to his name, but then Laban goes after the penny that he doesn't even have. I mean, he's just trying to get everything he can out of this man, Jacob. But the Lord was with Jacob. And if the Lord is with us, it doesn't matter if Laban is against us. Do you remember the story of Joseph? It's just one evil thing after another showing up in Joseph's life. His brothers sell him into slavery. And then sold into slavery, he is bought in Egypt by Potiphar. But the Lord was with him, so he prospers in Potiphar's house. Because when God is with you, it doesn't matter if your brothers are against you. It doesn't matter if they are. But then in Potiphar's house, he's falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, and he's thrown into prison for like a decade of his life. His life just withering and wasting away, a decade of it in prison. But the Lord is with him, even in prison, and he prospers there. He interprets some dreams. He eventually finds himself as Pharaoh's right-hand man, and as Pharaoh's right-hand man, he rescues his family from famine, saves the promised people. Right? This is the story of Joseph. It's a story that's telling us. It's a storied presentation of Romans 8:31. If God is for us, it doesn't matter what's against us. It does not matter who's against us. Joseph's life shows us that no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you can stop God's plans for you, his promises for you, his purposes for you. That's what Joseph's life shows us, and it's what Jacob's life shows us. Jacob leaves one dysfunctional family for another very dysfunctional family, and then he starts a very dysfunctional family of his own. Right? It's just dysfunction everywhere. But if God is for you, it doesn't matter who's against you. Everything prospers in Jacob's hands. Everything in the text does. Laban's wealth goes from a little to a lot under Jacob's care. The ESV titles the second half of Genesis chapter 30, Jacob's prosperity. That's the title of that little section of the scriptures in the ESV. Even Laban sees that this is the Lord. Even Laban says, Jacob, the Lord has blessed me through you. Like the Lord is blessing you and I'm just kind of underneath your umbrella right now, Jacob. So the Lord is blessing you, but I'm just catching all of that blessing myself. Even Laban sees this. But now we come to the crisis of the passage. And here is the big climactic crisis moment. Jacob is now ready to leave, but Laban doesn't want to lose his stuff. This is the problem. Jacob's ready to go, but Laban's like, you ain't taking my stuff with you. You're not taking my girls with you. You ain't taking my grandkids with you. You're not taking my herds with you. You're not taking my stuff with you. So Jacob and Laban strike a deal. Jacob says, okay, Laban, how about this? Give me the speckled and the spotted sheep and goats. So Laban, I'm going to serve, I'm going to care for your flock for the next 6 years. It's going to go great. And of your flock, give me the speckled and the spotted sheep and goats and all the black lambs. That'll be my wages, Jacob says. Now, the easiest way to understand what Jacob is saying here is to think of it this way. This is like Jacob saying, Laban, how about we do this? Why don't you give me the abnormal part of your flock and the rare part of your flock? Why don't we do that? So essentially, this is Jacob being an anti-Jacob. He's actually stacking the deck against himself in this moment. He's saying, I'll take the abnormal and the rarest part of your flock, just the tiniest portions of it, Laban. Let's do that. He's stacking the deck against himself. And Laban looks at that deal, and of course Laban's like, you're going to stack the deck against you? Yes, Jacob, I would love to squeeze a little bit more out of you before this whole thing is over. So yes, we've got a deal. The deal is done, but Laban isn't finished with his doing. As soon as the deal is made, Laban gets all the speckled and the spotted sheep. He gets all of those out of his flock. He sends those with his son so Jacob can't have them. So that now whatever Jacob does with the flock that's remaining won't have as many speckled and spotted sheep in it. So you can maybe think of it this way now. Not only has Jacob stacked the deck against himself, Laban has also stacked the deck against Jacob. It is doubly stacked against Jacob at this point. But if God is for you, it doesn't matter if the deck is stacked against you, even doubly stacked against you. Now, in this text, Jacob is definitely shrewd in this text. He's using some selective breeding, but commentators are quick to point out that whatever he's doing in his shrewdness is like 1 part science and 9 parts superstition, right? Animals, when they're breeding, don't produce speckled and spotted other animals because they're seeing something while they're breeding. That's just not how the thing works, right? It's not science in that way. And the point of the text is this. The point that the text is trying to show us is Jacob prospering is not because of Jacob's doing. Jacob's prospering is because of God's doing. God is behind his prospering. And this is why Jacob says to Rachel and Leah in Genesis chapter 30, verse 5, "But the God of my father has been with me." Yeah, God's with me. He's been working for me. "You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me. He's continually stacked the deck for him against me, and he's changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If Laban said, 'The spotted shall be your wages,' then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, 'The striped shall be your wages,' then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me." If God is for you, it doesn't matter if Laban or anyone else is against you. So we read this to finish chapter 30 in verse 43. "Thus the man Jacob increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants, male servants, and camels and donkeys. He is a wealthy man. He has prospered." Now again, what's the point of the text? It is God proving his promises. It is God reminding Jacob, proving to Jacob and to you and I that no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you can stop God's promises, his plans, his purposes for you. Jacob prospers, even with the deck stacked against him, because God is always with him, always at work for him. Friend, this week is Thanksgiving. Can you take a moment to look at your life and see the many ways God has put blessing into your life? The many ways God has prospered you. And please don't be so foolish as to think that that prospering is because of your doing. Friend, that blessing is because of God's doing, not your doing. So we should give, with humility, we should give thanks to God for his doing. This is God showing, if I'm for you, who can be against you? It doesn't matter who's against you. It's God proving his promises. And now the fourth thing God does. God gives people. He gives pain. He gives prosperity. And then finally, God gives protection. Okay, so Jacob finally decides to leave. And when he leaves, the old Jacob is going to come out. It's the old him, right? In chapter 31, verse 20, we read this. "And Jacob tricked Laban." There's the old Jacob. He tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he was intending to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So rather than telling Laban he was about to go and trusting God, who has been with him and worked for him, trusting God that has done all that for him to sort out the details of that, he gets scared. And in his fear, he waits for Laban to leave and then he bolts. Now, if you put yourself in Jacob's shoes for a moment, you can see why he's doing this. If all you can see, if you're Jacob and all you can see is Laban, and you're not seeing the Lord, all you can see is Laban, there's plenty of reason to be fearful. He knew Laban didn't want to lose his stuff. And he knew that Laban, if his stuff was going to be threatened, he would come and try to take it by force. He knew that. And that's how the story turns out. That's exactly what Laban does. In verse 22, we read this. "When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsmen with him and pursued Jacob for 7 days. And he followed close after Jacob into the hill country of Gilead." And then you skip down to verse 25. "And Laban overtook Jacob." So Jacob, when he left home, was running from Esau. Now, when Jacob left Haran, he is running from Laban, right? And the language is militaristic here. Jacob fled. This is not, I'm just leaving. No, it's I am running from a person, right? It's he fled. Then Laban pursued. It's not just I am going to say goodbye to a person. No, it's I am chasing a person down. It is he followed close after him. Eventually it says he overtook him. This is militaristic language. Then you get to verse 24. But God. Those are the best two words in the Bible, aren't they? But God. Jacob is about to have his family stolen from him. But God. Jacob is about to have his stuff stolen from him. But God. Jacob is about to lose everything. But God. They are the best two words in the Bible. But God. Verse 24, but God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. This is the Lord looking at Laban and saying, you don't touch my man. You do not touch Jacob. He's my man. He's under my protection. You don't get to lay a hand on him, Laban. I love what one commentator said. He said it this way. It was only by divine protection that Jacob brought anything, even his life, back from exile. It was only by God's protection that he brought a family back, that he brought his stuff back, that he brought his kids back, and that he brought his life back. This is, again, God proving his promises. If the Lord is with you, it doesn't matter if Laban's against you. If the Lord is with you, it doesn't matter if the whole world is against you. God is showing us in Jacob, us, church, no person, no evil, no tragedy, no sin done by you or against you can block my plans for you. Now, it might not feel that way for us today, but this passage is inviting us to see through the way we feel to the way things are. If God is for you, who can be against you? It might feel today like your pain is invincible. And God in this passage is just whispering to you, your pain is not invincible. My promises are. My promises can take any pain in your life, doesn't matter how big it is, and redeem it. It might feel like today that Laban's plans, bad guys doing bad things, that those are the invincible things. But God is saying to us, no, bad guys doing bad things, that is not what's invincible in this world. My plans, my promises, my purposes are what's invincible. You might look at your life and be like, but no, there's some circumstances in my life. These things are the invincible ones. There is no way these circumstances, these things can change in my life. They are invincible, and God is looking at us and saying they are not invincible. The point of these 3 chapters is for God to look at you and say, my promises are the only thing that are invincible. My purposes are the only things that are invincible. It's God looking at us and saying, my promise, my plan for you, friend, it's sturdy. It's dependable. You can trust it. Now, let me finish by doing 2 things, just answering 2 questions very, very briefly. Question number 1, what do these promises produce in a human life? What are these promises meant to produce? Answer, God's promises take weak, failing, and fearful Christians. And God's promises take those Christians and it inserts this defiant hope into their heart. And that defiant hope makes Christians heroic. That's what the promises of God are meant to do in your life. They are meant to make you heroic. Do you remember the story of King Hezekiah? The Assyrian army, the most powerful army of the day, has showed up in Israel, and they are about to conquer Israel. They have come to do some damage. And everybody is scared to death. And Hezekiah looks to his people and says, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the horde that is with him. Right? The most powerful army and the biggest army on the planet. Don't be afraid of them. Why, Hezekiah? Here's why. For there are more with us than with him. That's why. With him, with that army, it's just an arm of flesh. But with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. And then look at what the people did. And the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. That's what the promises of God are meant to do. They are meant to put hope, defiant hope into your heart and then make you heroic so that you can move out into this world that's got a million things against you. You can move out into that world with confidence, knowing that if God is for you, it doesn't matter what's against you. That's what it's meant to do, make you heroic. Second question, who are God's promises for? Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against you? If God is for us, who can be against us? If shows us that this promise does not apply to all people. God being with you and God being for you does not apply to all people. And if saying God is for me is the greatest thing that could be said about us, then the opposite is also true. Saying God is not for me, God is not with me, God is actually working against me, that would be the worst thing that could be said about our lives. Because if God is working against us, does it matter who's working for us? No, it doesn't. So the most important question of our life is, how do we go from God being against us to God being for us? And here is the answer the Bible gives. We turn from our sin. All the sin that we know disqualifies us. And we turn from all the good deeds that we think somehow qualify us before God. We turn from all of that and we throw our life on Jesus. The one who lived for us, died for us, rose from the grave for us. We throw our life on the risen Jesus. And when we do that, God brings us into his family. He receives us as sons and daughters. And then he promises to use his mighty power for us for the rest of our days. Friend, when he is for you, when he is with you, always at work for you, can I just remind you of this again? There is no person, there is no evil, there is no tragedy, there is no sin done by you or against you that can block his plans for you. I love how Charles Spurgeon said it. He said, when God is for you, his sovereignty makes servants of everything. His sovereignty will make a servant of evil in your life. So all evil's going to do in your life is serve God's plans and agendas. It's going to make servants out of tragedy in your life, out of your sin, other sins. All of those things become servants in the hands of God. All of those things do not block God's plans for your life. No, they bow to the plans of God. They are bent into the plans of God for your life. Church, if God is for us, who can be against us? Who can be against us? Will you bow with me? I want to give you just a moment to receive from the Lord. What is it the Lord would want to give you in this text today? What's he want you to see and behold and just your heart to be re-awed by? Friend, if God is for you, who can be against us? This passage is here to help you believe that promise. And friend, if you're not in on the promise yet, if you haven't turned to the person of Jesus and given him your life, this is your chance to do that. Jesus stands ready right now to rescue you, to promise that all of his power will be at work for you for the rest of your days. Give your life to him. So God, would you help us today? God, would you come and minister the good news of Jesus, your promises to us today? God, would you help us see in this text your faithfulness? It's in the good name of Jesus we ask it.